There are some gotchas in Python that will drive you absolutely nuts at some point in your programming career. I want to share one of the most common of those gotchas with you now, in the hopes that you'll avoid it, or at least recognize it when it shows up in one of your programs. I like to call this the mutable object trap. I've written a function here that takes a string and an existing list and adds the first letter of the string to the list. It does this in place, but it also returns the list. So we might use this function like this. So I've created a list that has two single character strings in it, A and B, and then I've asked my function to take that list and append the first letter of the word cat to the list. And it does this in place, so we would expect my list to now contain the characters A, B, and C. Let's try. Good, that worked. Now notice that I provided a default value for list to append, and the default value is the empty list. The idea being that if I haven't already created a list, I'm going to let this function create one for me. So I should be able to use the function like this. My new list equals append first letter, and I'm going to pass the string dog. Since I'm not providing an argument for the list to append parameter, I'm expecting this function to create a list for me, and then return a list that simply contains the letter D. Let's print out the result and try. Good, that's exactly what I got. Now, let's try this one more time. My newer list equals append first letter, and I'm going to write the string elephant. I'll print out my newer list, and I expect this to behave in exactly the same way it did the last time. Since I didn't provide an argument for the list to append parameter, I'm expecting this function to create a new list for me and return a list with simply the letter E. But when I run this, the list returned has the letter D and E. Where did the D come from? I didn't include another element here with a D, and this certainly isn't my new list that I created before. This is an issue that confounds many programmers, and it's so common that PyCharm is warning us up here that our default argument value is mutable. That's why I call it the mutable object trap. When the Python interpreter is first run on this module, it goes through the function definitions and binds an object to the default values. So this empty list is created and bound to an object from the beginning, even before I call this function. When I call the function the first time, it adds the letter D to that object. But now the object that's bound to this default value is no longer the empty list. It's now a list that contains a letter D. And when I call the function again and expect to start with a brand new empty list, instead, the object that's bound to the default value is the one that already contains the letter D. So I end up with the letter D and the letter E. This problem comes up both in functions and in methods of classes. Fortunately, there's a solution. Python is only binding objects that show up in the function signature. It's not creating any objects in the body of the function until the function is actually called. So instead of assigning the empty list as a default value to list to append, we'll assign none. And in the body of the function, the first thing we do is check whether list to append points to none. Remember, we use is, not equals in this case. And then we'll reassign the empty list to the name list to append. This creates a new empty list object at the time that the function is run, rather than at the beginning of the interpreting process. Now if we run our code again, everything works as expected. Keep this problem in the back of your mind. It will happen to you.